Space, A Journey to Our Future, is a highly interactive exhibit that ignites the desire for space exploration and discovery, sparking imaginations and inspiring new generations of explorers to dream of the possibilities that lie ahead. Highlights include touching actual rocks from the lunar surface, exploring a Mars-based camp while walking through a full-size habitat and work pod, taking a spin on a centrifuge, and looking far into the future of our exploration of the universe. This free exhibit runs from January 28th to September 6th at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, open from 9 to 5 with free admission and parking. Visit nationalmuseum.af.mil.
Welcome to the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base near Dayton, Ohio. We are the keepers of their stories. Thank you for joining us during the virtual opening for the new Women in the Air Force exhibit. Discover women's U.S. Air Force contributions in each of the galleries, highlighted by brightly colored columns and markers. You can learn about Jackie Cochran, British female pilots, WASP, Women's Air Force Corps in Europe, flight nurses in World War II, women in the Korean War era, Air Force women in Southeast Asia War, moving towards equality during the Cold War and current operations. You can also explore the stories of the first group of 10 female pilot trainees. Stories continue with women in combat, those who were willing to make sacrifices, to ambassadors in blue, Air Force leaders, and female missileers. Space food, women in space, research and development, and a transatlantic flight with an all-female crew are the great highlights of this exhibit. All careers, all airmen, and all guardians are vital to the continued success of the Department of the Air Force. Stick around for a behind-the-scenes look at the making of the exhibit at the end of this broadcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your Master of Ceremonies, Executive Director of Air Force Materiel Command, Ms. Trish Young.
First things first, I gotta be able to see. Good evening and welcome to the official opening of the Women in the Air Force exhibit. It is quite an honor to be your greeter and participating in this exhibit opening. We have a number of senior Air Force and civilian officials and visitors attending this event tonight, both online and in virtual. We're live streaming so that it's a greater audience and everyone can be involved. I would like to take a moment to recognize those women who appear in the exhibit and who are here with us tonight. First, our currently serving Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass. Not only the first woman to serve in the position, she is the first woman to serve as a senior listed advisor for a military service. Next, we have General Mary Ann Miller, a long and distinguished career, culminating in her becoming the first Air Force Reserve officer to command an active duty major command when she assumed the duties of the Commander, Air Mobility Command. Welcome, ma'am. Serving as standard bearers, the success of the first 10 women students in undergraduate pilot training class 7708 allowed all women to subsequently serve in flying duty in the Air Force. We are pleased to welcome 5 of the first 10. Colonel Kathy Kosand, Lieutenant Colonel Mary Livingston, Lieutenant Colonel Sandy Scott, Major Virginia Wingate, Captain Christine Lockhart. As flying duties expanded from support aircraft to all mission aircraft, other opportunities became available. A combat veteran, Colonel Samantha Weeks, became the second female Thunderbird pilot and the first woman to be the lead solo pilot for the Air Force's premier demonstration team, a true ambassador in blue. Female medical personnel have served in the armed forces with distinction since World War II. The first woman to receive an Air Medal was an Army Air Force flight nurse. Carrying on in that tradition, Colonel Regina Alney was the medical lead on a C-5 during Operation Baby Lift at the end of the Vietnam War. Transporting orphans from Vietnam, the C-5 crashed shortly after takeoff. Despite sustaining serious injuries herself, she and the fellow crew members ignored their injuries and rescued the surviving children in their care. Colonel Alney was recognized with the Cheney Award, becoming the first woman to receive this award that recognizes valor and sacrifice in a humanitarian case. Women today serve in all skills in the Air Force, bringing talent to all mission sets. The first female sniper in the military, we welcome Captain Jennifer Whittekamp. Combining respect for the heritage of women in the workforce and creating their own esprit de corps, members of the 31st and 731st Munition Squadrons combined their talents, dressing as women ordnance workers from World War II. The team won the quarterly bomb building competition at Aviano Air Force Base in January 2020. We welcome the Bouncing Bettys. With us is Technical Sergeant Anna Merkel, Staff Sergeant Catherine Clyde, Staff Sergeant Andrew Napati, Airman First Class Aaron Brom, Airman First Class Ashlyn Martin. And with us also from the newly established United States Space Force is Lieutenant General Armane. Welcome. And serving as a face of women in the service today, along with Brigadier General Vaught, who worked to establish the Women's Memorial in Washington, D.C., we welcome Captain Andrea Lewis and Senior Master Sergeant Jennifer Bowen. Thank you. If you would all please stand and join me for the singing of the national anthem by Senior Airman Milan Smart.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, and please be seated. Another round of applause for a great rendition. Thank you, Airman Smart. Tonight, I'd like to welcome some of our guest speakers of the evening. We will be hearing from Acting Secretary of the Air Force, the Honorable John Roth, who is joining us via video. The Commander of Air Mobility Command, General Jacqueline Van Ovos, will be joining us virtually. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, is joining us in person, and the United States Space Force Director of Staff, Lieutenant General Nina Armagno, will be speaking as well. We would be remiss if we did not take a moment and recognize the team that led the efforts to the planning, the research, and building of this incredible exhibit. From the National Museum of the United States Air Force, curators Christina Douglas, Krista Dunkman. Joining us virtually, she couldn't be here because she took a job in USAFE in their history office, is Jennifer Blankmanship. And the exhibit designer is Mr. Luke Maynard. I have to tell you, they made a video. It's a YouTube video that's out there behind the scenes. It is incredible when you see what this team, their thoughts, their collaboration, their creativity, and how it came to be. It's just incredible. So I hope you enjoy that video as well. It's a must-see. And that's a plug for them. Also, we have many distinguished guests joining us this evening, both in person and virtually. So please join me in a round of applause for all our distinguished guests tonight. At this time, if you would direct your attention to the screen for comments from Secretary Roth.
Good evening. It is a true honor to join you for this momentous occasion, even if it is virtually. Let me pause to thank those who played an integral role in tonight's event. To the museum staff and volunteers, thank you for your commitment to preserving history and the many hours you dedicate to inspiring visitors. Thank you to the Air Force Museum Foundation and Women in Military Service for America Memorial Foundation. Your leadership and financial contributions to this exhibit allow our story to be told for generations to come. Finally, thank you to the museum's curators and artists, Christina Douglas, Jennifer Blankenship, Krista Dunkman, and Luke Maynard. You helped transform an idea, a concept, into a beautiful reality that honors our women in service. I cannot wait to see the displays in person. Today is a tremendous day for the National Museum of the United States Air Force, for the pioneers featured throughout the exhibits, and for visitors from around the world who will soon marvel at these newly displayed artifacts. Remnants of history that honor the sacrifices, the success, and the strength of Air Force women. For decades, millions of visitors have poured through the front doors of this museum, inspired by the Wright Flyer, the famed Memphis Belle, and Apollo spacecraft. Today, we place the contributions of Air Force women, heroes, alongside these storied relics. General Hap Arnold once remarked, "Your limits are somewhere up there, waiting for you to reach beyond infinity." His visionary words define the essence of the U.S. Air Force, a service with a robust history of reaching beyond infinity, of breaking barriers since its inception. From breaking barriers imposed by gravity, to Chuck Yeager rocketing through the sound barrier, to Joe Kittinger parachuting from the edge of space. Throughout these operational triumphs, the Air Force also smashed through social barriers by leading the charge on diversity. Less than a year after the founding of our Air Force, on the first minute of the first hour of the first day that she could, Esther Blake raised her right hand, swore an oath to defend her nation, and became the first woman to serve in the nascent Air Force. Since that moment, women have been an integral part of our service, protecting democracy, defending freedom, and paving the way for future generations. Today, we pay homage to the women featured in these displays, who broke barriers, and we honor all women who have served and continue to serve in the Department of the Air Force. Women like Jackie Cochran, the former director of WASP, the first woman to break the sound barrier, and the first woman to receive the Distinguished Service Medal. Susan Struck, who paved the way for women in service to simultaneously be mothers and airmen. Heather Penny, who launched to the skies in the morning of September 11th, 2001, armed with only courage, yet tasked to protect our nation's capital from threats overhead. And so many more who have donned the uniform and bravely fought, and sometimes died for our country. It is fitting that their story is now prominently featured alongside other key artifacts that shaped our history and continue to tell the story of the Air Force, reaching beyond infinity and breaking barriers. Women who were once inspired and now motivate the next generation. This exhibit is a remarkable representation of our history and our future.
Thank you, Secretary Roth. And now a message from General Van Ovost, AMC Commander.
Good evening. I'm General Jackie Van Ovost, Commander of Air Mobility Command. It's my distinct honor and privilege to be part of this ceremony and help welcome the Women in the Air Force from Yesterday into Tomorrow exhibit to the National Museum of the United States Air Force. I'm proud and humbled to see so many of my heroes and mentors in these exhibits, some of them actually in attendance, such as members of the first 10 women to graduate from undergraduate pilot training, General Ellen Palikowski and General Mary Ann Miller. You know, for more than 100 years, women have been breaking barriers both in aviation and as leaders. From early aviation pioneers like Harriet Quimby, the first woman in the United States to earn a pilot's license and fly across the English Channel, and Jacqueline Cochran, who, before becoming the founder and director of the WASP program, was the fireball, racing through the skies, setting all kinds of records and breaking countless distance, altitude, and speed achievements held by her male counterparts. And members of the first 10, whose glass-shattering achievement made it possible for all of us who followed. To our modern-day Mach 1 barrier busters like Major General Jeannie Leavitt, our nation's first female fighter pilot and first woman to command a U.S. Air Force combat fighter wing. And Lieutenant Colonel Christine Mao, the first woman to fly the Air Force's newest fifth-generation fighter, the F-35. Not to mention the leadership giants who widened the path along the way, like Major General Jeannie Holm, the first woman to wear a star on her shoulder, General Janet Wolfenbarger, our first female four-star, and General Lori Robinson, the first woman warrior to lead a combatant command. To quote Christine Lockhart, one of our first 10, "If you don't dream big, you don't get very far." Well, these women had big dreams, and they went after them with all their might. But don't get me wrong, while the singular accomplishments of these women are impressive, it's not just those with firsts and onlys to their names who represent the barrier breakers for our Air and Space Force. Just think about the female flight nurses who paved the way for the entire aeromedical evacuation field. Sent to North Africa in 1942, these winged angels were particularly vulnerable to attack as they flew in aircraft used to transport military supplies. Throughout World War II, about 500 medevac nurses watched over nearly 1.2 million patients, saving all but 46 lost en route. During the Korean War, a total of 12,800 WAF officer and enlisted served worldwide. But the only women allowed to serve in the battle zone were, again, our medical air evac nurses. Talk about blazing a trail. It wasn't until 2 years after the war ended in 1955 that men were even accepted into the Air Force Nurse Corps. What all these women have in common, whose strength, sacrifice, courage, and determination can't help but be felt as you look at their pictures and read their stories, is that they didn't set out to break barriers. They set out to do what they loved and to be the best at it, and they changed the world along the way. And I bet they'd tell you that your name doesn't have to appear in the headlines or in the history books or even in the halls of this exhibit for you to have made meaningful contributions to the direction and development of our Air and Space Force. While the powerful exhibits throughout this museum perfectly capture and tell amazing stories of so many firsts and so many trailblazers, they fulfill a higher purpose, inspiring the current and next generation of servicewomen, especially the little girls that find themselves standing amongst these giants and say to their parents, "I want to be just like them when I grow up." My sincerest thanks to Mr. Tillotson and the countless staff members, volunteers, and private donors who helped create such an amazing exhibit. You are ensuring future dreams become realities. Congratulations, and I can't wait for my next visit to the museum to experience these displays.
Thank you, General Van Ovos. Please welcome to the podium Lieutenant General Armano, please.
Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be here to unveil the Women in the Air Force exhibit at the storied National Museum of the Air Force. Thank you, Mr. Tillotson and Ms. Leslie Grieser, for coordinating this event and for inviting me to join. A special thank you to the extraordinary women and their families who donated artifacts and archival material to be displayed, and to the museum build team of curators and exhibit designers and builders. You've woven women into and through the history of air and space, which is exactly right, and I can't wait to see the results. Speaking of artifacts and relics, I have a story of my own to share. You see, there's a small museum at Peterson Air Force Base in Colorado, and as a space person, I had the opportunity to frequent their displays many times. One day I saw a new display and I was so excited to see it. It was a display of the system I operated as a second lieutenant at my very first assignment there at Beale Air Force Base. It was my space operator's console from the gigantic phased array warning radar there at Beale, designed to detect incoming ballistic missiles. Well, I was really excited until I saw exactly what it was. The display was entitled Old Pave Pause System. But the truth was, it wasn't the old console. It was the upgraded console. I had actually spent most of my assignment there upgrading the old console to the thing that was on display. Therefore, what I'm saying is, I had worked on the old system, older than even the museum had procured. Well, as we look to the past, in order to honor the amazing contributions of women in air and space history, I can't help but have this immense sense of pride. It's motivating, it's energizing, and it's inspiring to see the huge accomplishments of women throughout our history. And being the newest service among us, it makes me dream about the opportunities for women in the future. So as this new exhibit helps us look back 10, 20, 50, even 80 years in our past, as I look forward, what in the world will women accomplish 10, 20, 30, 50, 80 years into our future? Well, I can tell you, in the United States Space Force, the future is bright. Just 15 months ago, not even 15 months ago, the nation created a service much like the Air Force was created 73 years ago. The United States Space Force was born out of a need to deal with a new domain and the adversaries therein. We've had a remarkable first year. It was the year of invention. We invented the new service. We stood it up. We designed our headquarters organization. We stood up our first field command, the Space Operations Command. We wrote the Chief of Space Operations planning guidance and authored and published our first space doctrine. We're continuing to move out in year two. Year two is the year of integration. We have built this service, and now we need to integrate it and unleash it. You know, there is no joint force capability today that operates without space. Therefore, what we're doing in year two is making sure we integrate this new service with the Department of Defense, the Joint Force, the interagency, commercial allies, and other partners. And we have important work to do. Just a few things. Publish a human capital strategy that provides new tools on how to recruit and retain a diverse and effective workforce. Determine the best way that we present space forces to combatant commands. Create a force design that's resilient space capability for the nation, and reform and upgrade our ability to acquire new capabilities quickly. There's no shortage of work to do, I assure you, but the future is indeed bright. And I'd like to close by telling you why I know this future is bright. The future is bright because of women like Major Danielle DePaulis. She goes by Danny. I first met Danny when she was a lieutenant at Patrick Air Force Base and Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, where I was her wing commander. She was giving me a tour of the Delta IV Heavy launch pad and tower, and she was so sharp. I hired her almost immediately to my front office. Now she's a major in the United States Space Force. She has deployed with our most elite space systems. She's a weapons school grad, and this summer she's on her way to Maxwell Air Force Base to be part of a special study program we call Blue Horizons. She's brilliant, energetic, and a leader. When I think of our bright future, I see Danny's face. Someday we'll see pictures of Danny on these walls as she continues to lead, inspire, and frankly, kick butt for the United States Space Force, for the history and honor of all women, and for the defense of our great nation. Turns out, the sky is not the limit. Semper Supra.
Thank you, General Armano. Now, would you please welcome Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Bass, to the podium, please.
Good evening. That's when y'all are supposed to say good evening. It is indeed a great day to be a United States Airman, especially on an evening where we get to come together and celebrate so very much. It is a joy to be here to all of the Air Force Museum leadership team and all of the many volunteers who made this evening a huge success. Please join me in a round of thank you. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, thank you so much for the opportunity to attend this incredible event. It is no secret that in history of women in the military, that at times it has indeed been an uphill battle. Many of our female firsts have been hard-fought battles against a system or an institution that told us we did not belong. It took astonishing acts of courage and dedication to break through several barriers. Our history is full of women who decided that the status quo just wasn't enough. You heard it from our acting secretary when he talks about women like Staff Sergeant Esther Blake, who again was the first woman in the Air Force who enlisted at the first minute, at the first hour, on the first day that women were allowed to join. You also see it in many of the examples that we have here. The Bouncing Bettys, Captain Dorothy Elias, Captain Martha McSally are all torchbearers of an incredible legacy that continue on this day, and that includes many of the firsts that were named here already by Mrs. Young, and if you were one of those firsts, I'm going to ask you to stand up so that we can acknowledge you. All right, we had a few shy ones that just stood up. This exhibit tonight is a testament to your will, your determination, your energy, your unyielding spirit in the face of adversity, and it should be a lesson for future generations that we will continue to break barriers and shatter the glass ceilings. And we will continue to fight the hard-fought battles until there is a day where there are no more firsts. And we will do this, again, for the present and the future generations. For airmen like A1C Ashley Gutierrez, who's here this evening, for airmen that I met earlier today, Senior Airman Kayla DeQuito, and for the senior airmen who graced us with the national anthem. We will do this so that every single airman, whether you're in here today or watching us virtually, can see themselves serving in the world's greatest Air Force. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Bass. As one of the top senior female civilians in the Air Force, I have been asked to share my perspective and thoughts about women in the Air Force. The key, I think, for the Air Force is when we talk about airmen, we talk about military and civilians. They are synonymous. Just as we have had women like tonight that we're honoring, break barriers. Across the service, there have been, I like to think of the women as they're all mentors, they're all leaders, they are all looking to change our path and give people opportunities that they did not think they would have. This year, I will reach 36 years of service in the Air Force. I was an Air Force brat. And my dad was a B-52 pilot, and in his twilight of his career in the Air Force, he was stationed here at Wright-Patt, and he taught at AFIT, and he worked in foreign technologies. So I grew up here, went to Wright State, I graduated, I was part of the faculty and an academic advisor for 3,000 freshmen, making sure they stayed in school and got good grades. I needed a change. So kind of looking right across at Wright-Patt, I'd been to the museum since I was 5 years old. I have grown up watching this museum evolve and highlight and tell the stories of the Air Force. So I joined the Air Force in an intern program, Palace Acquire. We're called PACs. That program today is still our key program that brings civilians into the Air Force and puts them on a career path to serve right along with the military. It's a different type of serving, but it is something that still gives you that pride and accomplishment, and just have so many opportunities. I started at Air Force Logistics Command then, and I was there for 8 years. I had an incredible start with people like Ruth Tyree and Dorothy Tuck and Rick Reed and Howard English, not only teaching me about the Air Force, about the core values, but about leadership, collaboration, and teamwork. I moved on to a combatant command, the U.S. Transportation Command. The joint world just took my game to the next level because I had friends and peers and leaders. One of my best battle buddies became the Joint Staff J4, Lieutenant General Kathy Gainey. One of our fellow commanders, Major General Ann Dunwoody, became the Army's first female four-star. At the time, I was in awe of them, but when you think back from where they came and what they achieved and where they took women in service and our country, it's just inspiring. They taught me so much that when I came back on the Air Force side and went to the five-sided puzzle palace, the Pentagon, I got to work and learn from General Alan Pelikowski, General Marianne Miller, and General Van Ovost. But also, as I went along in my career, I started to see the other female senior executives. and what they were contributing. Pat Zarakowicz, Barb Westgate, and Darlene Costello. They, like myself, often found themselves in senior leader meetings the only female, just like many of our general officers have. You had to learn style, grace, determination, and you had to fight just as hard for your budgets from people like Dave Tillotson, who wanted your program to be his favorite offset and save money. But what I saw was camaraderie that I did not see from my friends who were working in corporate America. There is a sense of team, a sense of family and commitment among all of our airmen. And my mentors along the way demonstrated that it's not only about what you contribute, what do you pay forward. And as many of my peers and I, Kathy Wadden from the LCMC, what we talk about in civilian development is what do we leave behind to tee up for those who will come behind us? Are they getting the mentoring? Do they have the leadership examples? How far can they go when it's their turn? And so I'm incredibly grateful. I'm very proud. I'll tell you, I don't think my dad thought graduating as a liberal arts major that things were going to go real smoothly. But that's what the Air Force does. It gives people opportunities to make their dreams come true. And the women here tonight and the women that we all know have helped us along the way, that's what we're honoring, and that's what we're here to celebrate. So again, to Mr. Tillotson and the museum, to the team, the exhibit is incredible. I look forward to ending the official portion so everyone can go see and take pictures and tell their stories. So with that, I want to thank all of the women here tonight and who are out there virtually that helped make all of this come true and have helped all others achieve their dreams, big or small. You gave them the motivation, you gave them advocacy, so thank you for that. So next we're going to conclude our formal program, but I'd like to have final comments from the curators of the exhibit, and I'd like to welcome Ms. Christina Douglas to the stage. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you again to all of our distinguished visitors, both here in person and joining us virtually. Your presence and interest in this exhibit is truly an honor for those of us who have been working on this exhibit for the past few years. In truth, I've worked on this exhibit only fairly recently. The content, the words you're reading, the photographs you see, the documents, that's the work of my friend and colleague, Jennifer Blankenship, who, as Ms. Young mentioned earlier, has taken a position as a historian in Germany, in USAFE. While I didn't get to work directly with Jennifer as she developed this content, she and I would have lots of conversations about how exciting it was that we were finally doing a comprehensive exhibit about the women in the Air Force. Had we looked for things in our collection through the archives, and we would get puzzled and frustrated by the fact that there simply wasn't enough in our collection to do a comprehensive exhibit. Quite honestly, starting out, there was a dearth of research, of photographs, of artifacts, and other material. So reaching outside of our normal curatorial pattern was fun, and it was exciting to examine the history and the mission of the United States Air Force from this different perspective. For me personally, Researching and learning about the evolution of the Department of Defense and the Air Force policy regarding women serving in the Air Force has been fascinating. From attitudes related to the very first female aviators, to the WASPs, to the Women's Air Force, from the changing maternity policies, updating and then terminating combat exclusion policies. And along this journey, there have been so many incredible women who have become part of something bigger, served as role models and leaders, who constantly work to break free of gender biases. They were not afraid to push boundaries, and they refused to accept no, and they created a path for so many more to follow. Women such as Jeannie Holm, Marcelette Harris, Grace Peterson, Jeannie Levitt, Shauna Kimbrell, Salha Jabin, the incredible women, the first 10, quite honestly, everyone I'm seeing in the audience right now in this room, they, you, and so many other women are shining examples of how you can go after your dreams and throw open a few doors while you're doing it. The results? Well, in terms of policy, today we can say that all military occupations are open to women, without exception. As a mother of 2 daughters, that is something I'm incredibly proud and that I'm able to say to them, that they can join the Air Force or the Space Force, and they can be anything they want to be, without exception. Speaking of mothers and daughters, and role models and leaders, Jennifer and I often discussed our very own special women in the Air Force. For Jennifer, it's her mother, Dolores, who retired from the Air Force as a Master Sergeant after 21 years of service as an admin specialist. For me, it's my mother, Stephanie, who will 100% downplay this if you ask her, was enlisted and trained as a helicopter mechanic and worked on UH-1Ns. Jennifer and I are both products of military families, and so much of that gives us the passion for how we approach our careers as civilian airmen here at the museum and for the Department of Defense and the Department of the Air Force. And it is that same passion that we hope to pass on when we open exhibits like this to every other little girl and boy that walks into this museum. I am excited to work on future exhibits where I don't have to paw through the archives looking for a photograph that just so happens to have a female service member in the background. We won't have to, because today, right now, women are in the picture, both literally and figuratively. Policies won't change for us, they will change because of us. All throughout the DoD, the Air Force, Space Force, we have women leading a new generation of women and men, and this will only help propel us higher as a service. On behalf of myself and Jennifer, I'd like to thank all of the women who have served, who are currently serving, and who will serve in the future. You embody leadership, integrity, commitment, self-respect, whether you're a senior airman or 4-star general. You inspire. And I thank you for the opportunity to be an incredibly small part of collecting, preserving, and presenting your history. Thank you. I would now like to introduce my colleague, Kristen Dunkman.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so thrilled for you all to finally see what we've been working on, and I hope you enjoy your time here tonight. As the collections curator for this exhibit, I worked on procuring, selecting, and preparing all of the artifacts you'll see on display. Artifacts are at the heart of every museum because artifacts carry with them both memory and possibility. We hold on to objects from the past because they remind us of a certain time, a specific place, a loved one. They are a symbol of how that person, place, or time has shaped us and signify not only where we come from, but how far we've traveled since. Objects serve as a touchstone for the stories we tell and give a physical presence to history that words alone cannot. But how do we choose which stories get told? Which objects get to take up that physical space? The stories of women often get very little of it, because as it turns out, history is not written by the winners. It is written by those on the winning team with the most power. But women have always been on the team. They were there as nurses on the front lines in World War I. They were there as WACs and WASPs during World War II. Esther McGowan Blake, as we've heard several times this evening, was there on the first minute of the first hour of the first day women were allowed to enlist in the Air Force. Women took whatever scraps of power were given to them and proved their worth at every step. They fought consistently to build on the progress of those who came before them and to redefine the possible for those who would follow after. For too long, women and girls have walked through these doors and seen nothing of themselves reflected back at them, but that changes today. A few weeks ago, I was walking through the small hallway that leads to this hangar. I noticed a young girl and her grandparents looking at the panel that features the photos and titles of our current Air Force leadership. The grandfather was pointing to each person, looking at the photos and titles, and reading off the names to his granddaughter. But she was looking at the ground, not at all interested. But then he got to the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force and read off Joanne Bass's name. The grandmother said, "Look, she's a woman." The little girl looked up and excitedly exclaimed, "Like me." Seeing that young girl realize that someone like her could achieve so much is something that will stick with me for years to come and exemplifies why this exhibit is so important. By giving the stories and artifacts of women their much-earned place at the National Museum of the United States Air Force, we show young girls that in the future, the Air Force will have a place for them too. I would like to thank our museum leadership for recognizing that this exhibit was long overdue and for trusting myself, Jennifer Blankenship, Luke Maynard, and Christina Douglas, and countless other colleagues to help bring it to fruition. Thank you for saying, "That sounds cool," instead of "That sounds crazy," when I told you I wanted to bring a 320-pound concrete duck from Tucson, Arizona to Wright Pat. But most importantly, thank you to the women in this exhibit for giving us stories to tell. Thank you to the ones who donated artifacts years ago, knowing how important they were before anyone else did. And thank you to the ones who responded so generously to my cold calls and emails with fantastic objects to help tell your stories. This exhibit is for you and because of you, and I truly hope we have made you proud. Thank you.
As we conclude the event, you are free to tour the museum until 9 p.m. There are docents at each of the milestone exhibits. Our virtual audience can join the tour by visiting the museum website and downloading a virtual tour of the exhibit. Under normal circumstances, we would all sing the Air Force song. However, for the health and safety of our guests instead, please join the hearing of the song sung by Senior Airman Malon Smart of the Air Force Band of Flight.
Off we go into the wild blue yonder, flying high into the sun. Here they come, zooming to meet our thunder. Adam now, give 'em the gun. Down we dive, spouting our flames from under. Off with one hell of a roar. We live in fame or go down in the flame. Nothing can stop the U.S. Air Force.
A special thank you to our Air Force Museum Foundation, the Royal Air Force Museum American Foundation, and everyone who contributed to the success of this event and exhibit. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This concludes our formal program. Please enjoy the museum.
Here's a behind-the-scenes look at the creative team who brought these stories to the forefront.
We chose a central location in the museum for the intro. We found that most of the visitors will walk through this central area, and from there it branches out into all of the other galleries, following individual stories. From that central location will be maps and headers of what the locations will be telling and the stories behind them. My name is Luke. I'm a designer at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. I've been working here 10 years, and I love every minute of it. My role in the Women in the Air Force exhibit is the designer. I get to decide how it's displayed, the best way to display the content, color palettes, materials, and each of those has a meaning to it. Everything you choose should have a meaning behind it. And for the story of women in the Air Force and the hardships they had to go through to become equal members in the Air Force. So the steel plates represent the walls that the women came up against as they made their way through history, laying the foundations, and they had to break their way through that. So we decided to cut silhouettes of the women of that era into each of the steel plates. They'll be placed in a row, showing what their path was. But it wasn't just they have to get through this, they have to leave something behind for others to follow. So that's the story behind the silhouettes cut in steel. And to do that process, we had to outsource it to a laser cutting lab, and they had to engineer and cut those steel plates, and they shipped them to us, and that's where we begin the process of refining the edges, welding up the bases, cutting holes for the floor anchors, and making it safe for a visitor, while at the same time being the first people to touch and interact with them. When you design things on paper, you don't get to touch it and feel it and understand what it is. And when you give it to the shop and they start building it, start grinding on it, they understand that this is an actual piece of work, and it is not finished until it feels right to them and ultimately to the visitor. A lot of my friends and family and people I meet ask what it's like to be a designer at a large museum. And I think the coolest thing, although we do a lot of really neat things behind the scenes, we get to meet a lot of really neat people. But the coolest thing is the opening nights when you see the actual families of the heroes there, or sometimes even the heroes themselves, seeing the exhibit that honors them and honors the Air Force, and knowing yourself that you'll never get credit, no one will ever know you did it. You don't mind, it's not for you. It's for them. And just seeing that honor they get in that moment is amazing. The world will always be up against barriers that need to be broken. And this story is one of those, to show where things come out, where we are now today, because of those who are brave enough to step up and be what we need in those times. And those women stood up. They accomplished that. They proved it in World War II. They prove it today. The story in itself is very powerful, but to read how the women conducted themselves, how they were able to step into unwanted roles and step up and overcome and prove that they could do things even better than their male counterparts, and then become leaders, shows that anyone can be anything.
I think it's so important because even though women were allowed to be in the Air Force in the early 1950s, they've had to fight for so long to be able to completely serve their country the same as men. So it wasn't until 2019 that all positions were completely open to women. So it's been a very long fight, and I think it's very important for people to come see it because you have our next generation of women that could be in the Air Force, and when they come to the National Museum, they should see that it's not only possible for women to do these things, but that it's normal, and that they should not doubt their abilities at all. Today we installed the Women in Combat section of the Women in the Air Force exhibit. The one case features women that flew in combat since the 1993 combat exclusion policy was lifted. We featured General Levitt, who is the first female fighter pilot, and then we feature Martha McSally, who is the first woman to fly in combat. There's also Vanessa Dobos, who is the first female aerial gunner. We also have in that case Shauna Kimbrell, who is the first black female fighter pilot. And then we also have Christine Mao, who is the first F-35 pilot. In the other case, we have Airman First Class Elizabeth Jacobson, who unfortunately passed away during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005. So we have a case honoring her sacrifice. The exhibit is multi-gallery. It's featured in every single one of our galleries here at the museum. We try to make it integrated into the rest of the Air Force story. It's a very human story. It's not necessarily about a specific event or a specific person. It's just chronicling women in the Air Force from the beginning of flight through now. We focus on very significant moments. We have these pillars that you'll see that are installed, focusing on women in combat, women in flight, equality. We have women in space, research and development. We try to get all facets of women's service in there, from civilian, military. We have a lot of scientists, we have some artists, we have combat pilots. So we have a lot of things going on here that visitors can come see.
I am Jennifer Blankenship. I was the research curator for the Women in the Air Force exhibit, and that required me to do a ton of research. For several months, I worked directly with two different individuals, Luke and Krista, and it was really just the three of us researching, talking, discussing, coming up with new ideas on what should be included or how we should represent something visually. We finally got to a point where we were able to start building after we had approved plans, and seeing our builders out there putting things together and watching visitors see that transform and come to life is amazing. It's been a lot of hard work for Krista, Luke, and I. Our work is finally coming out for the public, and that's a rewarding experience. One of the best parts of this exhibit was my ability to talk with women who lived these experiences. It was far more exciting than reading an article or a book, and I spoke to so many women and a few men who supported women throughout these events in history. I spoke with 9 of the 10 first female pilots that graduated in 1977. They let me into a world that I would never have had the opportunity to do otherwise. They allowed me to sit in on emails where they talked about their experiences, and you could see them drawing connections that they hadn't maybe thought of since the 70s, or maybe they had never even thought about until decades later when they could see it as a bigger picture than they could see it back in that day. But getting to correspond and talk one-on-one with these women who have broken so many barriers, not just at the time of the event, but continuing on, they opened pathways for other women, and they made other pathways even wider so that more women and men could follow in what they had done. And it was very rewarding. This experience has been probably the most rewarding experience of my life. We're already telling a few women's stories. We covered the WASP, WAC, couple flight nurse exhibits, but women's history is a lot more than just those 4 areas. And I am so grateful that we had this time and opportunity to showcase more women and more areas that they've touched. We've touched on women's policy changes and women today, and so we've brought our story further than nursing and early aviation, and we've shown how far women can go and have gone. A ton of advancement even today for women's history, and women's history didn't stop in the 50s and 60s or the 70s when they finally got to fly. Women's history continues today, and I'm hoping that visitors will see that the story isn't finished and that there's a lot more to the story that they should learn about, hopefully.